Hi, Kratom Quitters. Welcome to the Kratom Sobriety Podcast. This is episode 105, and today I am here with my co-host, Libby. Libby, how are you?
I'm doing pretty good. Definitely decompressing after the holiday weekend. So,
I hear you on that, yeah. The first one, and then get a little bit of a break, and depending on what you celebrate, there's more coming. We've got a great interview lined up for this week. So Charlie sits down with Kelly, who had a typical experience with Kratom. I don't have a lot of details on the interview, but I'm sure it's going to be a good one. And we'll get that queued up for you here in a minute. But before we get there, for our intro today, we wanted to chat a little bit about recovery and comparing your recovery to others. I was thinking about this a little bit the other day when I usually go to my Smart Recovery in-person meetings on either Monday or Tuesday. So I went yesterday because we're doing this on a Wednesday. I was just sitting there, and I sometimes find myself, like, when I'm listening to people give updates or when interacting with people online, I find myself comparing where they are with their recovery to like where I am. And I've never came out of doing that comparison and found it was a healthy thing to do. Yet I continue to work on not doing it, but continue to do it. And I'll give you a couple examples. I hear a lot of people where it's like, oh, I got clean from Kratom and my relationship improved with my family, and I got a better job, or this happened, and things are going great. And while things are definitely going great, much better than they were going in active Kratom addiction, I have not had a lot of big, earth-shattering, life-changing recovery moments. Still have some challenging family relationships that I'm working through. Quite honestly, I'm just being 100% honest. When I was at the height of my Kratom addiction, my career was doing way better. I think that has more to do with just dumb luck and timing than sobriety. And I can tell you for certain that towards the end of my Kratom use, it was going off the rails. But for a period there, things were better, and haven't really seen a big uptick in things from that regard. But, it's unhealthy to do this because so many good things have happened in my life, and I'm like looking at the most optimal outcome and wishing I was there. So that's just my example of sometimes comparing where you are in recovery to others is unhealthy because we're all on our own individual journeys. And I think most importantly, like, we don't know where the other person started. I don't know. How do you feel about that?
yeah, a lot to respond to on that one. For me, I think about speaker meetings and the way that it's sometimes presented when they're like, oh my gosh, I was this gutter heroin addict or whatever their vice may have been. And now I'm head of AA and I'm sponsoring all these people and my relationship with my parents is wonderful. And like, I'm fit and I'm doing, my job is great and I'm getting married. And you like see this progression, and it can be really hard not to be like, well, I have just as much time as them, but my life doesn't look like that. What am I doing wrong? Or what am I not working hard enough at? And I found that really checking myself, instead of using that as a comparison of like where I'm not, using that as inspiration of like where I can put more work in. I think that there's also a level where like Kratom medicated those comparisons for me, because I have a big tendency to just compare myself to people outside of like addiction, like bodies and intelligence and like how much I'm getting done and how fit I am and how much I'm working out and how many books I'm reading and all the ways that like any human can compare. And I think that sometimes I wonder like how much Kratom dulled those comparisons or like boosted confidence in ways that now that I'm not on Kratom, I'm pinned up against myself and those things are louder. So it's a constant meditation of trying to be conscious of where I'm being critical of myself.
Yeah, that's a really good viewpoint. I didn't think about what was my thought process when I was impaired on Kratom, how I thought I was doing versus a sober brain, coherent thought, and actual true observation of where you are. And yeah, making those comparisons can definitely be challenging. I think it's, in life in general, there's this, I don't know, maybe human beings have a natural inkling to like compare ourselves to others. But yeah, I find myself doing the same things, like constantly having to take a step back to say, like, why are you doing that? You don't know XYZ about this person, and you don't see what they're like outside of the meeting or outside of the interaction you had with them online or the individual conversation you had. And I remember too, like the first time I tried to get sober way back when on different substances, and the first meeting I went to and being like, hey, I'm not that bad. And it was like a justification to go out and keep using. So there's that too, which can be very dangerous. Like you compare yourself to someone else and you realize that my problem is as big as that person's, therefore it's fine, when you obviously know it's not fine because you found yourself at a recovery meeting.
Yeah, that's the other thing that I wanted to say to you. I think comparing yourself in this sobriety, where have you been and how far have you gotten off of Kratom, is not the whole picture. Because for you and I, where we maybe were 20-year addicts,
Yeah.
it's a better idea of like, how far have I gotten since 2011 for me, since like the first time I put down a substance to like today, where I've kind of really evolved as a human being. That is a much more clear picture of how far I've come.
Yeah, that's really good too to think about. The other thing I've been thinking about from a positive perspective is it's like there's recovery and then there's self-improvement in other aspects. And there's a lot of other things I've done to work on behaviors and, change the way I'm doing various things in my life that I found weren't leading to the outcomes I was hoping to achieve for myself, which are different than recovery goals. And I've made a lot of progress there. So you make a good point that it's really important to make sure you're putting in all the data, if you will, to like have that full, complete picture of where you're going, where you've came from, and where you are on your journey, I guess.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. Well, I think we'll leave you with that, listeners. It's always good to check in with the community and get the support you need, but don't take it to the extreme where you're comparing yourself to everybody else's recovery and getting upset because you're not at a certain point. Things progress the way they progress. So with that, I think we'll get on to Charlie's interview with Kelly.
Hello, folks. This is Charlie, and I'm here with Kelly with a Y. How are you doing, Kelly?
I'm doing good. Thank you for asking. How are you doing tonight?
Up north here, we got our first real snow today. There was actually some of the schools were closed. So we had a mild fall, and I think I was in denial that winter was coming.
It's here.
Yes. Well, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm 44 years old. I'm born and raised here in South Florida. I am a diehard Miami Dolphins football fan. I am married to the love of my life, Christina. We've been married coming up on 4 years, together 8, and we have 3 cats who I'm extremely obsessed with.
Well, that's great. Christina's going to be interviewed by Libby, and we're going to have that upcoming week. So we're going to have another couple interview. So thanks for doing that as a pair. When did you quit Kratom?
I quit on June 30th of this past year. So it's been 158 days.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
When did you start using Kratom, and do you remember the circumstances and that situation?
I absolutely do. I was introduced to recovery for the first time in 2008. And shortly thereafter, I was introduced to kava bars and kava. And so kava has always been like a big part of my life. Unfortunately, that recovery slipped away and I did end up relapsing. And during that relapse, I ended up going to prison for 3.5 years. And it was the day after I got out of prison. I went back to the kava bar, which was my safe place. This was in July of 2016. The kava tender who was working said, "Hey, Kelly, you should try this new drink on the scene. I know you have back pain and I know you have low energy and this is all natural and this is going to make you feel good." And I tried it. I got released on July 28th. So that was July 29th of 2016. And I used it every day until June 30th of 2024.
Wow, that's a very distinct, memorable milestone in your life between getting out of prison and then starting to use Kratom. Does that mean you are in recovery from other drugs and alcohol? Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, I've been off heroin for 11 and a half years. My clean date for that is June 1st of 2013. I have not drank alcohol coming up on 9 years, and cigarettes in a little over 2, and then Kratom 158.
Yeah, you're like many of us. We come to the Kratom with a history with other substances too. So I can definitely rate, and a lot of our listeners can too. So when did Kratom start to be a problem early on?
I'd say the first couple years, it wasn't a problem. Looking back, it was. I was working in a treatment center.
Mm-hmm.
We're from South Florida where, it's mostly kava bars. So I would bring my brewed tea to work with me at the treatment center. I ended up getting fired from there and I never knew why. And when we quit Kratom was when I had the epiphany. They fired me because I was bringing Kratom into the facility. So with that being said, that was in the first couple years. I'd say my wife and I wanted to stop for about 3 years. And we would talk about it, but we would never do anything about it.
You have a couple of interesting things that later in the interview I want to get into. Like you have some experience working in recovery industry and then also working in the kava bars.
2 different sides of the coin.
Yeah. And be an interesting conversation. When did you first experience some negative consequences, like health-wise or mental health-wise? Sounds like you might have lost a job from your Kratom use, but when did the negatives start to outweigh the positives from using Kratom?
It got to the point, I'd say, in the last couple years where we were spending a lot of money. And as you just said, I was working in a kava bar for about 5 years, the last 5 years. Basically, I worked 4 to 5 days a week where my wife and I would drink free. And we were still spending about $2,500, $3,000 a month. That's silly. I'd say my addiction to Kratom really escalated last year on my birthday. My birthday is 2 days before Christmas, December 23rd. We had this really cool barbecue beach party for my birthday, and a bunch of different friends brought Kratom from different kava bars, and everyone brews it differently. And I ended up getting so sick. Oh my God, exorcist sick, so sick. I stopped drinking the tea and started doing the extracts, right? Because that made sense.
Yeah.
For the last 8 months of my addiction, I only did extracts. One of them was the new product that's out. I try very hard not to say product names because I never, ever want to promote something by accident. But yeah, the last 8 months was extracts only. So it was pretty rough there. The money was being spent more. I had a friend who I would call once a week, usually on Wednesday, Thursday. Hey, can I borrow $100 till tomorrow? And that's not normal.
Yeah, it sounded like you're getting free drinks at your workplace, but you're still spending at least $1,000 a month on yourself, and then when you combine the two of you, that's a pretty big habit. How did your tolerance over those 8 years build with the Kratom? Did you just start not to really feel the effects anymore, and it was just trying to keep yourself from getting sick at the end?
Absolutely, yes. I'd say I stopped feeling the effects about 4 to 5 years in, which is around the time I knew it was becoming an issue. Again, as I mentioned, I'm an ex-heroin addict, so I know what withdrawal looks and feels like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, if it got to be noon and I started sweating, my stomach got in knots, I was like, oh, I need to go get a tea. I need to go get a Kratom. So yeah, that's when it started. I also, when in the last few years, thought I was perimenopausal. I went to get blood work done numerous times because I was like, I'm so up and down. Like, I have adult acne. My hair's falling out. I'm sweating in my sleep. And it turns out that wasn't it. It was Kratom.
Yeah.
So it's pretty amazing to watch my life come back.
It sounds like you tried to quit a couple times. You want to talk about some of your unsuccessful quits, and then we'll go on to what happened 160 plus days ago.
Well, to be totally candid, we only ever talked about it. We never once took action. And I can tell you a little bit about my last day because I remember it so clearly, if
Yeah,
you'd like.
go for it.
We were at a kava bar, and there's this extract tea they make there. And a friend of ours who we hadn't seen in about 1.5 years, 2 years was there. He's a bigger guy. We were chit-chatting with him, and I was on like my second tea, and he's like, dang, Kelly, how are you drinking 2 of those? I drink a small one and I'm done. I'm like, okay, I like it. We ended up going fishing with him and his son. I ended up having a couple more of those teas. I ended up having 6 by the end of the day. And I remember him saying, geez, Kelly, you've had 6 of those. And I'm like, oh my gosh, are you like the tea police? Like, what the hell? I don't know. We went bowling with some friends that night, and I was just kind of reflecting. And I got off drugs to not be a slave to a substance. And here I was, a slave to a fucking substance. I woke up the next morning. I told Christina I'm quitting Kratom. She said, okay, I'm not. We met up with our girls at the kava bar that day. I just had, my regular Tongan kava. She got a tea and she had a few sips and then she threw it out. She said, I'm going to join you on this journey. And we haven't looked back.
Sometimes something monumental like that can break up a couple. And I'm glad it went this way than the other options there. So it sounds like you went cold turkey.
We did.
How was those first couple weeks?
You want me to be honest?
Yes, please.
I have detoxed in county jail, laying naked on the linoleum floor, hugging the stainless steel toilet. This was worse. In the comfort of my own home with my wife and my 3 cats, eating whatever I want and whatever clothes I want, showering whenever I want. This was worse. The restless legs were unbearable. The sleepless nights, the sweating. I thought changing my clothes once a night during like my addiction when I thought I was perimenopausal was bad. Changing my clothes 4, 5, 6 times a night, laying a towel on top of towel every time I changed my clothes. I was showering multiple times a day, but never once using soap, just sitting there and standing. And then sometimes sitting if I couldn't stand anymore. It was pretty rough. The first 2 weeks were pretty rough, the physical withdrawals. And then on day 12 came the mental. That was the hardest part.
Yeah. On the physical side, was there anything that you found that helped with relief from your physical symptoms?
Absolutely. I swear by black seed oil. I always say this word wrong. Liposomal vitamin C, magnesium for the restless legs. Lamethylfolate was one of my best friends during that and still is one of my best friends. It just really helped to even out your mood.
On the mental side, how did you tackle that?
I do want to say, and I hope this is okay, I lost my uncle and my 2 best friends to suicide within 18 months of each other. So suicide is something that's very near and dear to me. On day 12, I asked my wife to Baker Act me. She said no. And then I said one of the most disgusting things ever. I asked her if we could do a suicide pact. I said, let's just both leave. And she looked at me in like fear. And I kind of saw her look of fear and I felt the fear. And I'm like, what the fuck? Thank God we didn't do it. Yeah. The mental was definitely the most difficult part of this detox for me. I've never detoxed from a substance where it just fucks with your mind so bad. So yeah, it was really rough for me.
We're glad you're still with us. The both of you are.
Thank you.
For many reasons. Your 3 cats are very appreciative too. You're a service to the community now, and you're not alone. This is a tough subject. I don't know if we've talked much on the podcast, but I've had a lot of side conversations with people that felt in similar straits, when they're in the thick of it. The mental bottom is pretty bad for many of us. So the good thing, it's not permanent. A lot of problems are solved by abstaining from Kratom.
Yes.
And and once you get farther and farther away from that, there's a lot of upside.
Agreed. And it's funny you say it's not permanent, because that's one thing my wife would keep reminding me throughout the first 30 days. She's like, honey, it's only temporary. It's only temporary, honey. It's going to go away. And then when she was feeling rough, I'd be like, it's only temporary, honey. It's going to go away.
Yeah, there's something about with the withdrawals. You're counting by the minutes and hours. They do seem like these moments that are forever. It's like a permanent doom. But I know within 8 days, you found a community that you felt welcomed and it was a big support. Why don't you talk about that?
Absolutely. So the first 8 days, we cold turkey white knuckled it, just the two of us locked in our house with the kitties. On day 7, I made this really deep coded Instagram post. And it was like, music is clearer, day 7. And a girl from the Kava community down here said, hey, there's these meetings. It's called There's a Way Out. We attended our first meeting that night. KratomQuitters.com. We turned our camera on. Cameras and mics are optional there, but we kept our camera on from our first meeting until now, just to kind of hold ourselves accountable, just to kind of let other people see. Day 8, there was a lot of pain. I remember the first few meetings, I just cried and I cried. And I'm like, oh my God, the headache, the restless legs, this, that, and the other. A joke in the beginning was that Christina and I were never on the same page. We would check in and I'd be like, oh, I'm doing really shitty. And she'd be like, oh, I'm having a great day. And then it was finally around day 21, 22, we were finally on the same page. And we went to those meetings every single day, probably for the first 60 days. Now we are hosting meetings. We host them every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And it's really cool to be able to give back. And oh my God, I see your kitty. Hey, I'm like crazy cat lady. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm right with you, though. I only have one.
Oh, you need a friend.
Yes.
Anywho, it's just really amazing to be able to give back to a community that really gave me back life, gave me my skin back, my hair back, and most importantly, it gave me my marriage back. We talked of divorce frequently over the last couple years. And we didn't realize it was because of Kratom. We were in such a fog, and we didn't even realize we were in a fog. We were shells of humans, we were existing, but barely existing.
If you're out there listening and you're struggling, you can't go wrong with going to those meetings at 8 o'clock Eastern and go for 60 days straight. I promise you, you'll feel way better. You'll build new friends. You'll have a community. There'll be ways for you to give back, and you don't have to do it alone. Why don't you talk more about you? So talk about working in the kava industry and how that was so intertwined with your kratom addiction.
Okay. As I mentioned earlier, I am a convicted felon. So finding jobs is kind of tough for me. And a couple of my charges are pretty heavy. So it definitely is a setback for me. I do have 2 bachelor's degrees in interpersonal communications and criminal justice, which is ironic. But anywho, I couldn't find a job, and there was a new kava bar in town, and I ended up getting hired there. And I worked there for a couple of years. I did the social media. I built their website. And at that point, I didn't realize I was still in the fog. I didn't realize I was in the fog yet, rather. I ended up leaving that place and going to a newer place. That's where I started to notice. I really started to notice there. I remember this one girl, and I remember the first time she came in. She had a year and a half off alcohol. And she's like, one of my coworkers told me about this stuff. It's amazing. And at that point, I didn't know again. So I was like, oh, yeah, there's this strand, this strand, this strand, depending on blah, blah, blah. I give her kratom tea, and she comes the next day and the next day. And about a year later, maybe less than a year later, she was posting a GoFundMe to bring her cat to the vet. And I'm not judging in any way because, as I mentioned earlier, I was borrowing $100 a week from my friend. But when I saw that, I was like, a year ago, she wasn't like this. And I just, there's one distributor in town who would give me free products. There were quite a few who did that because they want us to try all the new stuff.
Yeah.
That's where it got really tricky. Because you're trying so much stuff and you're doing so much stuff. And then you have these people who come in and they're like, oh, I'm in severe pain. And again, this is one of those substances like heroin. It's bad the second you pick it up. Cocaine, it's bad the second you pick it up. I haven't met one person who knows kratom is bad the second they pick it up. So with that being said, I really had some back pain today. Oh, you should try this new extract. And my job was basically to get people hooked on kratom. When we first got off of it and quit, I had so much guilt, so much shame. I thought back to that one girl. I thought back to numerous people, And then my wife and I started thinking, we've known a few people to die. No one ever knew why.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. We'll never know. But it just makes sense. Like the one guy, he was 55 years old. He was healthy. He had a heart attack getting the mail. He had been 3 days without kratom.
Yeah. It's a really tricky thing because it is safer relatively than doing heroin or going to the bar and driving around drunk. But it's such a slow burn on the addictive side that it sneaks up on a lot of us. And we get in the same spot. Often the money, because your tolerance gets so bad that you either you go broke or other people like just revert back to the harder stuff because it's more affordable and it's more effective, and then that puts them at risk. But people accuse this podcast and our recovery community is like somehow we're demonizing kratom or kratom. But same hand, there's this other side of the marketing, especially in a place in Florida where there's a bar scene. Like there's not that up here up in the Midwest, but there's this big marketing to sell as much kratom as they can, and to put it in the most positive light. It's such a weird battle because I think a lot of us get stuck in the addiction with kratom longer because we've consumed some of that marketing, and we are in those communities where drinking lots of it is normalized and it's celebrated even,
Absolutely. I mean, for example, in a 10-mile radius from our house, there are 8 kava bars, if that just puts it in perspective. And I will say, there are a few people, I'm friends with a few of the owners down here, and a couple of the owners didn't want to do kratom, didn't want to sell kratom, didn't want to supply, didn't want to make it when they opened their bar. And a couple of them didn't, and they stuck to the roots, to the tradition, to the culture of kava.
Yeah.
And they almost lost their business because people want kratom. They want that dream, right?
Yeah.
And that's what's terrifying. It's like you said, it's the marketing, it's the lies that were sold.
Yeah, I don't come from a strong kava background, but I've interacted with some people that are really, there's this whole tradition with kava, and it is less addictive. It doesn't act on your opioid receptors, and there's just none of the negative outcomes that there is with kratom. But especially the kava bar industry, my understanding is like 80% of the sales are kratom or more.
I'd say the first bar I worked at was more. The second bar I worked at was about 80.
Okay.
So yes, you are very accurate in that.
Well, another thing, you had your foot in both worlds, in the recovery world. How does the recovery scene in Florida look at kratom?
Equivalent to heroin.
Okay.
When I first got out of prison, my first job was at a treatment center as a behavioral health technician. And, I told my sponsor at the time, I no longer am involved in 12-step programs. I just want to say that didn't work for me, but everyone's recovery looks different. I did tell my sponsor at the time that I was drinking kratom. She told me to find a new sponsor. Again, I was still working at the treatment center. I'd bring my little Kratom tea in. Hey, clients, try this. I don't know. That just doesn't sit right with me now.
You were early in recovery. You were just out of prison. So I think you should give yourself some grace there. And it was also like 8 years ago. So the knowledge that all of us have is a lot more advanced than back then. So
absolutely.
Any advice from being a couple quitting Kratom at the same time?
I definitely say she was my rock through it, and I hope she could say the same thing. I mentioned earlier, she would just constantly remind me, Kelly, it's only temporary. It's only temporary. If I was having explosive diarrhea, for example, she eased me. And she helped me to cope with it. When my moments were bad, her moments were good, and vice versa. So we were just a perfect balance. I will say I was very fortunate that I wasn't working at the time. Our boss does drink Kratom. And so he understood, and he let her work remote for 2 weeks. And during those 2 weeks, I'd be laying on the couch feeling just like poop. And she'd be on the phone with clients, which was like wild to me. But we just mainly encouraged each other, supported each other, and just kind of respected each other's boundaries too. I was in the shower for one of my just stand in the shower showers. She wouldn't come in and use the restroom, whereas normally she would. So I'd say just like encouraging each other and being there for each other.
That's wonderful. I'm glad you had each other, and we'll look forward to your partner's talk with Libby in coming weeks. So do you have any other beyond the meetings support systems to prevent relapse?
I'd say there's never enough tools in your tool belt, but with my years of experience working in treatment, going to detox, I just kind of people, places, and things, right? People, places, and things. We've wanted to move to Georgia for a couple years. We were given the opportunity about a week and a half ago to get out of our lease in this awful, awful place we're living. And we decided to move to Georgia. And actually 20 minutes before we got on the phone, we found out we got the house. So people, places, and things. There's only one kava bar up there, two. I'm not going to say I'm not going to go there, but by changing my environment, I'm certainly going to be able to pull back a little bit, which is pretty neat. And I can also say this move would not have happened if we were still on Kratom, because we wouldn't have the money. We wouldn't have the drive. We wouldn't have the desire. We wouldn't have the focus. So it's pretty cool to watch this all happen. And in terms of recovery, so quickly in less than 6 months.
Yeah, congratulations. I imagine being in Florida with, I think you said there was 8 kava kratom bars within the mile radius, and just you probably know tons of people, you working in those. Sometimes a geographic cure is helpful. And you guys already got a good foundation, so you're not just moving to another state. You're already going to have a lot of months under your belt, but it might be a good fresh start to be in a different environment.
Thank you. I'm pretty excited about it.
Can you go into a kava bar today and refrain from drinking kratom, or do you just stay away from them entirely?
We still go to kava bars probably 2, 3, sometimes 4 times a week. Kava, again, is a big part of our life. We actually had a kava ceremony at our wedding. Kava is something that we just embrace. I introduced Christina to it. At first, she was like, oh, this tastes like dirty mud water.
Yeah.
And it's like, once I explained it to her, and it's about Ohana, which is family and coming together, she kind of started to embrace it a little more. And especially since we quit Kratom, she's definitely embraced the culture a little bit more.
Wonderful. You told us the good news about your housing situation. How is the other things in your life? It sounds like you're almost millionaires now with all the money you're saving.
I wouldn't go that far. Life is good. My adult acne wasn't adult acne. My skin has cleared up. My hair is starting to grow back. We had a very non-existent sex life, and both of our libidos have come back. I'm working a real job. Like, I'm not working in a kava bar. I'm a convicted felon working a real job. And my boss is letting me transfer to another state to work remote. That's cool.
That is great.
Thank you.
People over and over again say the sex and the music is better off the Kratom. So
yes, I'd say it was about a month in. We went to go see Janet Jackson, and I don't know if it was the best concert of my life, but in my 30 days off Kratom mind, best concert of my life. We also went to Vegas for the first time. Well, my first time. She's been out there with a couple girlfriends, where we were able to meet one of the other people in our Kratom Quitters community, which was pretty cool. He lives out there. You know, we've just kind of been living life, going to Dolphins games and just doing stuff we enjoy that we hadn't done in so long. We're living again.
yeah.
Like, that's what we're doing. We're living.
At the beginning of the episode, I talked about the snow. I went and took 2 jackets to the dry cleaners. It was just they were like almost $80, $40 each. For $80, I could buy a whole new jacket.
Oh my gosh. Well, from a Florida girl who's moving to Georgia where it snows a few times a year, that's good to know. I'm washing my jackets before I come.
Yeah, it just $15 hamburgers. Holy, nobody's feeling rich these days. We got a couple more questions. We'll wrap up here. Is there a message that you'd like to tell your future self a year from now?
I always believed in you. I always knew you could. And I'm proud of you. I'm proud of the person you've become and the life that you're living. Sometimes I consider myself, and I would say that, you know, as I mentioned earlier, I'm 44 years old. I consider myself a late bloomer, you know, because I was drinking and drugging for so many freaking years. And then I went on my long vacation, AKA prison. So I really didn't start living my life till I was 36. And then I kind of realized I really didn't start living my life till I was 44, because that's when I quit Kratom. So essentially, I just would tell myself, "You're a pretty bad bitch, Kelly. You're doing good, kid."
That's a good little time capsule that'll be here in the podcast if you ever need to return to it. This one thing about age, I think I was born the first couple of weeks in the 1970s. And if I'm doing the math right, you came into the world the last couple of days of the 1970s. Did I get the math right there?
You are mathing correctly, my friend. That was good math. Yes. I was born in 1979.
Happy pre-birthday. You'll be hitting the big 4-5 in a couple weeks.
Thank you.
Is there any tip that you have, your top tip that you would give to somebody?
Top tip for someone quitting Kratom? Obviously, give yourself some grace. If you have the ability to take that first week off, do it. I know not everyone has that ability. And utilize the supplements. They were so beneficial for us. And that was certainly 3 tips. So my math isn't as good as yours tonight.
It's okay to have a 3-part answer to a question.
Okay.
Is there anything you'd like to say that we didn't talk about, or some parting wisdom before we say goodbye?
I just like to say, like, as I mentioned, I've recovered from several different substances over the years. I've been in many different recovery communities, and the community that I've been involved in while quitting this has been the most beautiful, loving, welcoming, family-oriented community I've ever had. There's a signal chat, there's a way out signal chat, and people in there literally have walked people through Walmart to like buy the right supplement. And the coolest thing is you see these new people come in, and those of us, you know, who have a little more time, and I'm still new with 5.5 months, but like the 3-weekers, they're helping the 2-dayers. And then in a couple weeks, the 2-dayers are at 3 weeks helping the 2-daysers. I'm tongue twisted, but it's really neat to watch the cycle and watch this community grow. And And a side note to that, devil's advocate, it's sad to watch the community grow because that's how many people are suffering. I can't even imagine how many people are suffering in silence, not even knowing that communities like this exist.
Yeah, it is one of the most isolating addictions, I think, in the Kratom world, where Kratom is celebrated. It's almost hearsay to say anything negative about Kratom. And then in the recovery world, people just don't know about Kratom, or it's controversial. It is great that the kratomquitters.com and the whole community that's around that is growing, and you don't have to do it by yourself anymore.
I'm so grateful for that.
Well, thank you so much, Kelly. It was a joy to talk with you.
Oh, thank you so much, Charlie. It was definitely a pleasure speaking with you as well.
All right. Take care.
All right. Thank you. Bye.